November 18th, 1925. The Hawthorne Inn basement reeked of whiskey and fear. 5 men sat around a table laughing at the scar-faced kid from Brooklyn who thought he could tell them how to run Chicago. Al Capone was 26 years old. He'd been in the city 8 months, and these bosses, Torrio's old crew, decided to teach him respect the hard way. What happened in the next 12 minutes changed organized crime forever. The newspapers never got the real story. The cops who found the bodies couldn't identify half of them, but one terrified waiter saw everything from behind the kitchen door. For 37 years, that waiter kept his mouth shut, until a film crew knocked on his door asking the wrong questions. The night Al Capone earned his crown, the night silence became survival. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vincent Torrino's hands hadn't stopped shaking since he'd closed the door on those cameras 3 hours ago. The documentary crew, Chicago's Lost Stories they'd called themselves, had asked innocent enough questions at first: local history, the old neighborhood, what it was like growing up when Capone ran the South Side. But then they'd started asking about the Hawthorne Inn. Vinny sat in his pizzeria's back office, the day's receipts scattered across his desk like fallen leaves, but the numbers blurred together. Outside, Ashland Avenue hummed with evening traffic, the familiar sounds of his neighborhood carrying through the thin walls. 37 years he'd been Vincent Torrino, pizza man. 37 years since he'd been Vincenzo Torrino, the waiter who'd served bootleg whiskey to dead men walking. The bell above the front door chimed. Through his office window, Vinny watched his adopted daughter Sophia flip the chairs onto the tables with practiced efficiency. 23 years old, pre-med at Northwestern, and she moved through the closing routine with the same methodical precision she'd inherited from her mother. Maria's daughter in every way that mattered. "Papa, you okay back there?" Sophia called, not looking up from her work. "You've been hiding since those people left." "Just tired, Piccola. Long day." But it wasn't tiredness that made his chest tight. It was the way the documentary producer had smiled when she'd mentioned the basement recordings. "Lost audio from November 1925, she'd said. "Recently discovered in a private collection." There were no recordings from that night. Vinny was certain of it. He'd been behind that kitchen door, pressed against the wood like his life depended on staying invisible, which it had. He would have heard recording equipment, would have seen the telltale signs of someone documenting what unfolded in that basement, unless they weren't talking about audio from inside the basement. The memory hit him like a Louisville slugger to the gut, running through the inn's back corridors after it was over, desperate to reach the employee exit. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, his white waiter's jacket splattered with blood that wasn't his. And in the main dining room, he'd glimpsed a figure by the windows, someone with a camera, the old bulky kind that society photographers used. Someone had been there. Someone else had witnessed the aftermath. Vinny's phone buzzed against his desk. Unknown number, Chicago area code. "Vincent Torrino?" The voice was smooth, educated, young. "Who's asking?" "My name is Michael Toretti. I'm with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think we need to talk." The name hit him like ice water. Toretti. One of the 5 bosses from that night had been named Toretti, Salvatore Toretti, who'd owned half the speakeasies on the north side until Capone's baseball bat had caved in his skull. "I don't talk to federal prosecutors. Not even when they're calling to warn you?" Vinny's grip tightened on the phone. "Warn me about what?" "Documentary crew that visited you today? They're not who they claim to be. And the questions they asked you are the same questions someone's been asking about you for the past 6 months, someone with enough resources to track down witness statements from 1925, someone who knows exactly what you saw that night." Through his office window, Vinny watched Sophia stack the last chair. She was humming something, one of the old Italian songs Maria used to sing while she cooked. The sound should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a countdown. Why would a federal prosecutor care about protecting me? Because my grandfather was Salvatore Toretti, and because 3 days ago someone broke into the federal archives and stole the original case file from the Hawthorne Inn murders, including the witness statements that were sealed for 75 years. The office walls seemed to close in. Vinny's breathing came in short gasps. The Witness Protection Program never contacted you, did they, Mr. Torino? No. That's because you were never the one in danger. You were the loose thread they left hanging, knowing that someday someone would pull it. The question is, who's pulling it now? Sophia appeared in his office doorway, keys jingling in her hand. Ready to go, Papa? I'll drive you home. Vinny looked at his daughter, Maria's daughter, the light they'd raised together in the shadow of his buried secrets, and felt the weight of 37 years of careful silence pressing down on his chest. Mr. Torino? Michael Toretti's voice crackled through the phone. Are you still there? The federal prosecutor was right about one thing. Someone was pulling the thread. And when it unraveled completely, everything Vinny had built would come apart with it. But first, he needed to figure out who'd really been behind those cameras today. And why, after 3 decades of silence, someone wanted the true story of Al Capone's coronation told now. The night that made Capone king was about to make Vinny Torino a target. The only question was whether the hunter had been waiting 37 years to finish the job, or if Vinny had been the real prey all along. Papa? Sophia's voice seemed to come from underwater. Who's on the phone? Vinny forced his fingers to uncurl from the receiver, setting it gently in its cradle. Michael Toretti's words echoed in his skull. You were the loose thread they left hanging. In the fluorescent glare of his office, Sophia looked impossibly young, her dark hair catching the light the same way Maria's had 30 years ago when they'd first met at St. Anthony's soup kitchen. Nobody important, he managed, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Just a customer asking about tomorrow's lunch special. Sophia tilted her head, studying him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing, Maria's eyes in their daughter's face. Since when do customers make you look like you've seen a ghost? Since the ghosts started calling back. But Vinny couldn't say that. Instead, he pushed himself up from his desk, joints protesting the movement. 62 years old, and tonight he felt every single one of them pressing against his bones like accumulated snow. Come on, Piccola. Let's go home. They locked up together in comfortable silence, Sophia checking the front door while Vinny activated the alarm system. The familiar routine should have been soothing. 37 years of the same closing ritual, the same gentle transition from work to home. But tonight, even the sound of his keys in the lock felt different. Final, somehow. Outside, November wind cut through his jacket with surgical precision. Sophia's Honda sat under the streetlight, its blue paint faded but engines still reliable. She'd wanted something flashier when she'd turned 18, but Vinny had taught her the value of things that didn't draw attention. Invisible is safe, he'd told her. Invisible keeps you alive. Now, he wondered if he'd been teaching her or reminding himself. You know what Mom would say right now? Sophia asked as they drove north through the old neighborhood. She kept her voice light, but her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. What's that? That you're doing the thing where you carry the whole world on your shoulders and forget that other people have backs too. Vinny closed his eyes, letting the memory wash over him. Maria in their kitchen on Sunday mornings, flour dusting her apron as she rolled out fresh pasta, the way she'd look up when he got too quiet, too thoughtful, too lost in the weight of things he couldn't tell her. Vincent, she'd say, whatever happened before you were mine doesn't get to steal the time we have now. Except it did. It always had. Every birthday party he'd photographed from the back of the room instead of standing close. Every school play where he'd sat in the last row closest to the exit. Every night he'd walked the perimeter of their house before coming to bed, checking shadows that had been empty for decades. Your mother was a wise woman, he said finally. She was. And she'd also want you to talk to someone when something's bothering you this much. Sophia turned onto their street, maple trees lining both sides, their bare branches creating a canopy of shadows overhead. The houses here were small but well-maintained, mostly inhabited by families who'd lived in the neighborhood for generations. Italian names on half the mailboxes, Polish on the others. The kind of place where people looked out for each other, where strangers were noticed, where documentary crews asking questions about Al Capone would be remembered. Their house sat at the end of the block, a modest 2-story with Maria's garden still visible beneath the late autumn debris. Vinny had kept up her flower beds as best he could, though his hands weren't as gentle with growing things. Sophia parked in the driveway but made no move to get out. "The people who came to the restaurant today," she said quietly. "They weren't really making a documentary, were they?" The question hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been helping with a documentary project for my bioethics class. Real filmmakers don't ask questions like they already know the answers, and they don't spend 3 hours setting up equipment for 15 minutes of interview." Sophia turned to face him, her expression serious beyond her years. "And because you've been scared since the moment they walked in." In the dashboard's green glow, Vinny saw Maria's stubbornness reflected in their daughter's jaw. The same determination that had made Maria adopt a broken-down ex-waiter with too many secrets and not enough explanations. The same fierce protection that had helped her build a family around the jagged edges of his past. "I'm not scared, Piccola. I'm careful." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Sophia's voice was gentle, but her eyes held steel. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're protecting me from something. And I need to know if that something is coming for us." Through their living room window, Vinny could see the lamp Maria had loved, still burning on its timer. The house looked peaceful, normal, a place where the worst thing that ever happened was a burnt dinner or a broken dishwasher. But normal was a luxury he'd never really been able to afford. And now, with Michael Toretti's warning echoing in his mind and stolen federal files somewhere in the wind, Vinny realized that 37 years of borrowed peace might finally be coming to an end. The question wasn't whether the past would catch up to him. The question was whether Sophia would survive the collision. The envelope was waiting on their doorstep like a sleeping snake. Sophia saw it first, her hand freezing halfway to the front door key. "Papa, did you order something?" Vinny's blood turned to ice water. The envelope was manila, thick, with his name written in careful block letters across the front. No return address, no postmark, hand-delivered. "Go back to the car," he said quietly. "What?" "Sophia, get back in the car, now." Something in his tone made her step back, keys still clutched in her trembling fingers. Vinny approached the envelope like it might explode, his dress shoes scraping against the concrete steps Maria had swept every morning for 23 years. The paper felt expensive between his fingers, heavy stock, the kind used for legal documents, or death certificates. Inside, a single photograph stared back at him, black and white, grainy with age, but clear enough to stop his heart. The Hawthorne Inn's basement, November 15, 1925. 5 bodies arranged around a poker table like broken dolls, their skulls caved in by Al Capone's Louisville Slugger. Blood pooled on green felt, reflecting the single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling like a dead star. And there, pressed against the service entrance in his blood-splattered waiter's jacket, was 19-year-old Vincenzo Torino. His face was turned toward the camera, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with the kind of terror that carved itself into a man's soul and never let go. Someone had been there. Someone had documented everything. Someone had been watching him for 73 years. Beneath the photograph, a note written in the same careful block letters. The documentary was just the opening act. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Navy Pier. Come alone, or Sophia learns what her father really is. A friend who was there. Vinny's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the front steps, the photograph shaking in his hands like autumn leaves. 37 years of careful construction. The pizzeria, the quiet life, the bedtime stories and parent-teacher conferences and normal, blessed normal. All of it built on the foundation of this moment. This terrible, blood-soaked moment when Al Capone had beaten 5 men to death and Vinny had watched it happen through a crack in the kitchen door. "Papa?" Sophia's voice came from somewhere far away. "Papa, what is it?" He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat like broken glass. The photograph showed everything, not just the bodies, but the truth he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it never happened. The truth that had made him change his name, flee Chicago, spend 3 decades looking over his shoulder waiting for this exact moment. He hadn't just witnessed the murders. He'd been summoned to witness them. The memory crashed back like a dam breaking. Capone's man finding him in the kitchen before it started. Those dead shark eyes and that soft voice saying, "Wants you to see this, kid. Wants you to remember what happens to people who don't show proper respect." being pushed to the service entrance, forced to watch through the gap in the door as Capone explained the new rules to Chicago's 5 most powerful bootleggers with 35 ounces of Louisville Slugger. "You're gonna tell people what you saw here tonight," Capone had said afterward, standing over the carnage in his blood-spattered suspenders. "You're gonna make sure everyone knows what happens when they forget who's in charge." But Vinny had run instead, disappeared into the urban maze of Chicago's South Side, eventually surfacing 3 states away with a new name and a mouthful of silence. He'd thought he was escaping. He'd really been following a script. "Papa, you're scaring me." Sophia had left the car, was climbing the steps toward him. "What's in that envelope?" Vinny closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 37 years of lies pressing down on his chest like a tombstone. Tomorrow night at Navy Pier, someone would be waiting. Someone who'd been there that night, who'd taken this photograph, who'd spent 7 decades planning this moment. The documentary crew, the stolen federal files, Michael Toretti's phone call, it had all been orchestrated to bring him to this point. The bait had finally been taken. "We need to pack," he said, struggling to his feet. The photograph went into his jacket pocket, next to his heart, where it burned like a coal. "Tonight, pack? Papa, what are you talking about? We're leaving Chicago, right now. We're going somewhere they can't find us." But even as he said it, Vinny knew it was too late. They'd found him after 37 years of hiding. They'd found Sophia. They knew about the restaurant, the house, probably every move he'd made since arriving in Chicago with nothing but a fake name and a head full of nightmares. The past had finally come calling, and it wanted what it had always wanted: Vincent Torino's silence, bought and paid for with his daughter's life. Sophia stood frozen on the walkway, car keys dangling from her fingers like broken promises. In the yellow glow of the porch light, her face cycled through confusion, fear, and something worse, the terrible recognition that the man she'd called Papa for 23 years had just become a stranger. "You're serious," she said, her pre-med student's mind cataloging his symptoms. Rapid breathing, trembling hands, the gray pallor that meant shock. "You actually want us to run away? Tonight?" Vinny fumbled with his house keys, muscle memory failing him. The lock that he'd opened thousands of times suddenly felt foreign, hostile. "Sophia, please, we don't have time for questions." "We don't have time for questions." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Papa, 5 minutes ago you were Vincent Torino who owns a pizza place. Now you're talking like we're in some kind of witness protection program." The key finally turned. Vinny shouldered open the door, Maria's wind chimes singing their familiar welcome song. The sound that had meant home for 3 decades now felt like a funeral dirge. "Pack 1 bag," he said, not looking at her. "Just essentials. We'll buy everything else when we get to—" No. The word stopped him cold. In the hallway mirror, he caught a glimpse of himself, wild-eyed, sweating despite the November cold. One hand pressed against his jacket pocket where the photograph burned against his ribs. "Sophia, you don't understand." "Then make me understand." She slammed the front door behind them, the bang echoing through the house like a gunshot. "Because right now, all I know is that some people came asking questions about Al Capone, and now my father wants to disappear in the middle of the night. So help me understand what the hell is happening." Vinny stared at her, this fierce young woman who'd inherited Maria's strength along with her eyes. 23 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and proud moments at school plays. 23 years of pretending he was just Vincent Torino, pizza man, instead of Vincenzo Torino, the last living witness to the night Al Capone painted Chicago red. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number: "Packing won't help. We know where you'll go." Sophia was watching his face. "Who's that?" "Nobody." But his hands shook as he shoved the phone back into his pocket. They were right, of course. Where could he run that they couldn't follow? He'd built his whole life around being invisible, forgettable, a man without a past dangerous enough to dig up. Except the past had never been buried. It had been waiting. "Papa." Sophia's voice was gentler now, the tone she used with frightened patience during her hospital rotations. "Whatever this is, whatever you're scared of, we can handle it, together. But not if you shut me out." Another text, Navy Pier, tomorrow night. or Sophia gets to read her real father's police file. The blood drained from Vinny's face. Sophia stepped closer, close enough to see the terror in his eyes. "They're threatening me," she whispered. "Aren't they?" Before he could answer, his landline rang. The old rotary phone Maria had insisted on keeping, its brass bell cutting through the house like an air raid siren. Vinny stared at it, knowing he shouldn't answer, knowing he had to. "Papa, don't—" He picked up the receiver. "Vincent." The voice was ancient, whiskey rough, speaking his name like a curse. "You look good for 62. Sophia's gotten tall. Beautiful girl. Takes after her mother." Vinny's knees buckled. He groped for the kitchen counter, fingers finding Maria's ceramic fruit bowl, the one Sophia had made in third-grade art class. "Who is this?" "You know who this is. I was there that night. Watched you watching through that kitchen door, shaking like a leaf in a thunderstorm. Capone wanted you to see what happens to people who forget their place. But you ran instead of delivering his message." Sophia was beside him now, close enough to hear the voice crackling through the old speaker. Her face had gone white as paper. "Took us a while to find you. Longer to decide what to do about it. But times change, Vincent. People change. And some debts just get more expensive the longer you wait to pay them. What do you want?" A sound like glass breaking. The old man laughing. "What we've always wanted. What Capone wanted. For you to tell the story. The real story. About the night 5 bosses laughed at a kid from Brooklyn, and what he did to make sure nobody ever laughed again." The line went dead. Sophia was staring at him, her face a mirror of that 19-year-old waiter's terror from the photograph. The daughter he'd raised in safety, in normalcy, in the blessed ignorance of what her father really was. "Papa," she whispered, "who was Al Capone to you?" And Vinny realized that running wouldn't save them. The only thing that could save them now was the truth. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Vinny stared at the dead phone in his hand, the plastic warm from his death grip. Sophia waited, her breathing shallow, her medical training the only thing keeping her upright as shock tried to claim her. "Sit down, Piccola," Vinny said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me—" "Sit down." The authority in his tone was new, sharp-edged, the voice of a man who'd once taken orders from killers. Sophia sank onto Maria's floral couch, her hands clasped in her lap like a child called to the principal's office. Vinny moved to the window, pulled back the curtain with one finger. The street looked normal, Mrs. Chen walking her ancient terrier, the Kowalski twins shooting baskets under their garage light. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that death had just made a house call 3 doors down. "November 15th, 1925, he began, not turning from the window. "I was 19 years old, working as a waiter at the Hawthorne Inn in Cicero, Al Capone's territory. The words felt like shards of glass in his throat. There was going to be a meeting that night. 5 bosses coming to discuss territory disputes. I was supposed to serve drinks, keep my mouth shut, go home to my mother's boarding house." Sophia's reflection in the window showed her leaning forward, hands pressed against her mouth. But they didn't want just a waiter that night. They wanted a witness. "Papa." "Let me finish." His finger traced a pattern on the glass, the same nervous gesture he'd been making for 73 years. "Capone's man, Johnny Torrio's nephew, found me in the kitchen before it started. Said Al wanted me to see something special. Pushed me to the service entrance, made me watch through the crack in the door." The memory unfolded like a film reel, black and white and stained with blood. 5 men sitting around a poker table, laughing, making jokes about this young punk from Brooklyn who thought he could run Chicago. They called him a joke, a flash in the pan. Said he'd be dead or in prison before winter ended. Vinny's voice cracked. Al walked in carrying a baseball bat. Louisville slugger. Said he wanted to respond to their concerns about his leadership style personally. Sophia made a sound, half gasp, half sob. "I watched him kill them, all 5, one by one. The bat coming down, the sound it made." Vinny pressed his forehead against the cold glass, and afterward, he looked straight at me through that crack in the door, smiled, said I was going to tell everyone what happened to people who disrespected Al Capone. "But you didn't." Sophia's voice was barely audible. "I ran. Changed my name, hopped freight trains until I ended up in Milwaukee. Worked in restaurants, kept my head down, thought I'd escaped. He turned from the window, finally meeting her eyes. Your mother found me there in 1963. I was washing dishes at a diner, eating one meal a day, jumping at shadows. She saw something in me worth saving. The photograph in his pocket felt heavier than stone. I never told her the truth. Told her I was running from debt, bad choices. She believed me because she loved me. His voice broke completely. God help me. I let her believe a lie for 23 years of marriage. Sophia's tears were falling freely now. The documentary people weren't making a documentary. They were fishing, seeing how much I remembered, how much I'd tell. Vinny pulled the photograph from his pocket with trembling hands. Someone was there that night, someone with a camera. They've been watching me for 73 years, waiting for the right moment to collect on Capone's debt. Sophia stared at the image, her father's young face frozen in terror, surrounded by carnage. Oh, Papa, oh God. They want me to tell the story now, the real story. Make me the witness Capone intended. Vinny's legs gave out. He collapsed into Maria's reading chair, the one that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. But if I talk, I put you in danger. And if I don't... His phone buzzed again. Another text. One more day to decide. Sophia starts her surgery rotation Monday. Such dangerous work, handling sharp instruments. Sophia read over his shoulder and went rigid. They know my schedule. They know where I work. They know everything. The weight of 3 decades worth of suppressed terror crashed down on Vinny like a collapsing building. I thought I could keep you safe by staying quiet. But silence was never protection. It was just delayed payment. And now the bills come due, and it's not just my life they want as collateral. Outside, Mrs. Chen's terrier barked at something in the shadows. The sound echoed through the November night like a warning shot. Sophia knelt beside his chair, took his weathered hands in her steady surgeon's fingers. Then we pay it, she whispered. Whatever they want, whatever it costs, we face it together. But Vinny knew the price they were demanding. His confession would destroy the peace Maria had built for them. His silence would destroy Sophia. Either way, the family he'd spent 37 years protecting was already gone. Vinny stared at Sophia's determined face, seeing Maria's stubborn courage reflected in their daughter's eyes. The same fierce loyalty that had saved him from a life of shadows was now about to destroy her. But before he could find words to explain why they couldn't fight this together, why some battles could only be lost, not won, the doorbell rang. 3 short bursts, a pause, 3 more. Expecting someone? Sophia whispered. But Vinny was already moving toward the window, his body remembering protocols learned in back alleys and basement speakeasies 73 years ago. A figure stood on their porch, hunched against the November cold. Elderly man in an expensive coat, leaning heavily on a walking stick. When he looked up at the window, Vinny's world tilted sideways. The face was ancient now, mapped with liver spots and deepened by decades, but the eyes were unchanged. Pale blue, empty of warmth, the kind of eyes that could watch 5 men die and never blink. Johnny Torrio's nephew, Vinny breathed. Christ, he's still alive. The doorbell rang again, patient and insistent. Sophia started toward the door, but Vinny caught her arm. No, this man... Sophia, this man was there that night. He's the one who made me watch. All the more reason to face him. She pulled free, moving with the same determined grace she used in the operating room. If he's been hunting us for 70 years, running stops now. Before Vinny could stop her, she'd opened the door. The old man smiled, revealing teeth too white and perfect for someone his age. You must be Sophia. You have your grandmother's eyes. Maria never mentioned her mother looked just like her. Sophia went rigid. How did you know my mother's... May I come in? It's cold, and these old bones don't weather November like they used to. He was already stepping across the threshold, uninvited, his walking stick tapping against Maria's hardwood floors. Beautiful home. Maria decorated it, didn't she? I can tell. She always had exquisite taste. Vinny found his voice. How do you know about Maria? The old man, Tommy Torino, The name surfaced from nightmares like a corpse from deep water, settled into Maria's reading chair without invitation. Vincent, Vincent, still asking the wrong questions after all these years. His fingers traced the chair's floral upholstery with disturbing familiarity. Maria Torino, née Benedetti, Milwaukee General Hospital, 1963 to 1985. Volunteer work with Italian families. Beautiful woman. Terrible cook, but beautiful. You stay away from... Vinny started, but Tommy raised one arthritic hand. She's been dead 9 years, Vincent. Cancer. I sent flowers to the funeral. Lovely service. Sophia's eulogy was particularly moving, his pale eyes fixed on Sophia. You spoke about how your mother saved lost souls, how she had a gift for seeing the good in broken people. Sophia was backing toward the kitchen, her face white with understanding. You knew her. You actually knew my mother. Knew her? Tommy's laugh was paper-dry leaves. Child, who do you think introduced your parents? The words hit Vinny like a physical blow. The diner in Milwaukee, 1963. Maria coming in every Tuesday for coffee and pie, always sitting in his section, always kind to the nervous dishwasher who jumped at loud noises. Their first conversation about his accent, her gentle questions about Chicago, the way she'd smiled when he finally worked up courage to ask her to dinner. No, Vinny whispered. She never knew, of course. Thought it was chance, destiny, love at first sight. Tommy's fingers drummed against the chair arm. But I'd been watching you for 15 years by then, Vincent, waiting for you to settle somewhere, build something worth protecting. When you finally did, when you found someone worth loving, well, that's when the real game could begin. Sophia's breathing had become rapid, shallow. You're lying. Am I? Ask Vincent about the first letter Maria ever wrote him, the one he keeps in his bedroom dresser, behind your baby pictures. Ask him about the return address. Vinny's legs gave out. He knew what Tommy meant. The letter was from Milwaukee General Hospital, where Maria had volunteered, where she'd met the Italian families Tommy had been steering toward her for months. Families with stories about a young man who'd fled Chicago with blood on his hands and terror in his eyes. She loved you, Tommy continued, his voice gentle as a confessor's. That part was real. The marriage, the adoption, 37 years of happiness, all real. But the meeting, the circumstances, the beautiful coincidence that brought you together? He smiled. I orchestrated every moment. Sophia collapsed onto the couch, her surgeon's hands pressed against her mouth. Our whole lives, everything we were, was built on my patience, Tommy finished. 37 years of investment, Vincent. 37 years of letting you believe you'd escaped, that you could have normal, that love could save you from what you'd seen. He leaned forward, his walking stick clicking against the floor. But love can't change the past, and the past has very specific requirements. What do you want? Vinny's voice was barely a whisper. Tommy's smile widened, and in his ancient face, Vinny saw the young killer who'd pushed him to that service entrance in 1925. Tomorrow night at Navy Pier, you're going to tell the world what Al Capone did to 5 men who laughed at him. You're going to become the witness he always intended you to be, and if you refuse, his pale eyes fixed on Sophia. Well, some coincidences are harder to arrange than others, but accidents? Accidents happen to young doctors every day. The silence that followed Tommy's threat was absolute, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Vinny felt the walls closing in, 73 years of careful distance collapsing into this single moment. Sophia's face had drained of all color, her surgeon's composure finally cracking under the weight of revelation. Navy Pier, Vinny repeated, his voice hollow. Public, cameras. Oh yes, Tommy said, settling deeper into Maria's chair like he owned it. The documentary crew will be there, of course, along with representatives from the Chicago Historical Society, the FBI, and several very interested parties from both coasts. His fingers continued their drumming. You'll tell them about that night. Every detail, every scream, every drop of blood on that baseball bat. Sophia stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. And then what? You kill him anyway? Kill us both? Tommy's laugh was genuinely amused. Kill you? Child, you're worth far more alive. Do you have any idea how many people have been waiting 73 years to hear Vincent's story? How much money has changed hands betting on whether he'd ever surface? He gestured with his walking stick toward the window. Your father isn't just a witness. He's a legend. The boy who saw Capone's rise and lived to tell it. But I didn't tell it, Vinny whispered. I ran. Exactly. Tommy's eyes lit up with something approaching delight, which made the story even more valuable. The lost witness, the silent survivor. Mystery breeds obsession, Vincent. And obsession, he smiled, obsession pays very, very well. Vinny felt pieces clicking into place, the machinery of manipulation finally revealing itself. You've been selling my location, all these years. Not selling. Managing. There's a difference. Tommy's tone was almost paternal. Do you think it was accident that you were never found? That no federal agent ever knocked on your door, no ambitious reporter ever tracked down the Hawthorne Inn's surviving staff? He chuckled. I've been deflecting interest for decades, Vincent. Protecting my investment. Sophia moved closer to her father, her medical training asserting itself as she checked his pulse, his breathing. You're having another panic attack, she murmured. Papa, look at me. Breathe with me. But Vinny couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, time folding in on itself. He was 19 again, pressed against that service door, watching Al Capone swing his Louisville slugger with methodical precision. The wet sound of impact, the way the laughter had stopped so suddenly. The beautiful part, Tommy continued, seemingly oblivious to Vinny's distress, is that it was Capone's idea originally. He wanted you alive, wanted your fear to spread his reputation. But then he died in '47 and suddenly you became, how do I put this, an investment opportunity, you bastard. Sophia's voice was steady now, surgical sharp. You destroyed our family for money. I preserved your family, Tommy corrected mildly. Who do you think ensured Vincent's restaurant stayed afloat during the recession? Who made certain Sophia's medical school applications found their way to the top of the pile? His pale eyes glittered. 37 years of invisible patronage, and this is the gratitude I receive? The revelation hit Vinny like another blow. His modest success, Sophia's opportunities, the comfortable life they'd built, all of it orchestrated, controlled, owned by the man sitting in his dead wife's chair. Maria never knew, Vinny said, needing it to be true. Maria knew nothing, Tommy confirmed. She loved you genuinely, completely, gave you a daughter, a home, a reason to live. I simply guided the circumstances that made it possible. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But love requires trust, doesn't it? And you built your entire marriage on a lie. Sophia's hands stilled on Vinny's shoulders. Papa? I killed her, Vinny whispered, the words he'd carried for 9 years finally escaping. The stress of keeping my secret, the weight of what I was hiding from her. It ate at her, made her sick. The cancer was genetic, Sophia interrupted fiercely. Her mother died the same way. You know that. But Tommy was nodding sagely. Guilt is such a powerful thing, isn't it? Even when it's misplaced, it shapes everything we do. He stood slowly, his walking stick bearing his weight. Tomorrow night, Vincent, Navy Pier, 8 o'clock. The burden you've carried for 7 decades finally gets lifted. And if he refuses? Sophia demanded. Tommy paused at the door, his hand on the knob. Then you'll learn what really happened to your biological father. Why a perfectly healthy 28-year-old man died so suddenly in that car accident. Such a tragedy, leaving behind a pregnant girlfriend who had to give her baby up for adoption. Sophia went rigid. My biological parents died in... Your biological mother gave birth to you in Cook County Hospital, alone, terrified. And when she saw Vincent and Maria's name on the adoption papers, Tommy smiled. Well, some coincidences are just too perfect, aren't they? The door closed behind him with a gentle click, leaving father and daughter staring at each other across the wreckage of everything they'd believed about their lives. Outside, Mrs. Chen's dog had stopped barking. The silence felt like a held breath before the final blow falls. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, 73 years deep. Sophia's face had gone completely white, her surgeon's hands trembling as the final piece of Tommy's manipulation revealed itself. Vinny watched his daughter process the implications. That even her adoption, the very fact of their family, had been orchestrated by the man who'd just walked out their door. "He killed my biological father," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "And then he made sure Maria and you would find me." "Sophia, don't." She stepped back, her eyes blazing with a fury Vinny had never seen before. "Don't you dare tell me it doesn't matter. Don't tell me the love was real so the lies don't count." Her voice cracked. "Our entire existence has been his experiment, a 70-year setup for this moment." Vinny tried to stand, his legs unsteady, reaching for her. "You're my daughter. That's real. That's—" "Am I?" The words exploded from her like surgical instruments thrown in rage. "Or am I just another prop in his game? Another lever to control you with?" She pressed her hands against her temples. "God, Papa, how do we even know who we really are?" And the accusation hit Vinny like a physical blow, but beneath the pain, something else stirred. Something that had been dormant for decades. He looked at his daughter, this brilliant, fierce woman who'd spent her life healing people, and saw her breaking apart because of his cowardice. "You want to know who you are?" Vinny's voice was suddenly steady, stronger than it had been in years. "You're the little girl who used to bandage her dolls and lecture me about eating vegetables. You're the teenager who held my hand at your mother's funeral and told me we'd survive together. You're the woman who saves lives every day because that's who you choose to be." He moved closer, his panic attack receding in the face of her pain. "Tommy Torino orchestrated how we met, but he didn't create who we became." Sophia's composure cracked completely. "But what if it's all been a lie? What if every good thing in our lives was just his manipulation? Then we take it back." The words came out with startling conviction. "Right now, tonight. We stop letting him write our story." Vinny walked to the kitchen drawer where he'd kept emergency cash for 30 years. His hands were steady now, purposeful. He pulled out the small pistol Maria had insisted they buy after a break-in 3 blocks away in 1987. She'd never known he was more afraid of who might come looking for him than random burglars. "Papa, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done in 1925. He checked the gun with movements that came back like muscle memory. "Tommy's right about one thing. This ends tomorrow night. But not the way he planned." Sophia stared at him, seeing something in his posture she'd never witnessed before. This wasn't the gentle pizzeria owner who jumped at loud noises. This was the man who'd survived Chicago's most violent decade, who'd outwitted the greatest criminal mind of his generation for 73 years. "You can't kill him. Papa, you're not a killer." "No," Vinny agreed, sliding the gun into his jacket. "But I'm not a victim anymore either." He turned to face her fully. "Tommy made one mistake in all his planning. He assumed I'd stay the terrified boy who watched Capone swing that bat. But you know what I learned from watching 5 men die?" Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I learned that killers have patterns, rituals. Tommy needs tomorrow night to be public, recorded, documented. It's not enough for him to collect on his investment. He needs the world to see his masterpiece of manipulation." Vinny's smile was cold, calculating. "But every ritual has a weakness. Every pattern has a breakpoint. What are you planning?" Instead of answering, Vinny pulled out his phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, his voice was calm, authoritative. "This is Vincent Torino. I'm calling to report a terrorist threat against Navy Pier tomorrow night at 8 p.m. "Yes, I'll hold for the FBI." Sophia's eyes widened. "Papa, Tommy wants his grand finale? His public confession?" Vinny covered the phone's mouthpiece. "He's about to get more attention than he bargained for. Federal agents, bomb squads, security protocols that'll turn Navy Pier into a fortress." His smile was grim. "Let's see how well his 70-year plan works when every law enforcement agency in Chicago knows there's a credible threat." As Vinny began speaking to federal agents, describing Tommy's threats in careful detail, Sophia saw her father fully for the first time. Not the gentleman who'd raised her, not the victim who'd spent decades hiding. This was the survivor, the one who'd outsmarted Al Capone's ghost for 73 years. Tommy Torino had spent decades believing he was playing chess, but he'd forgotten he was playing against someone who'd learned the rules from the devil himself. The call to the FBI lasted 47 minutes. When Vinny finally hung up, Sophia was sitting at Maria's kitchen table, still processing the transformation she'd witnessed in her father. The federal agents had been thorough, professional, and deeply interested in Vincent Torino's story, especially when he mentioned specific names, dates, and details that could only come from someone who'd truly been there that night in 1925. "They're setting up a perimeter at Navy Pier," Vinny said, his voice still carrying that newfound steadiness. "Bomb squad, tactical teams, the works. Tommy's grand performance is going to have a much larger audience than he planned." Sophia looked up at him, this man who'd raised her with such gentle hands, now moving with the careful precision of someone who'd survived decades of looking over his shoulder. "What happens when they arrest him?" "They won't arrest him tonight." Vinny sat across from her, his weathered hands steady on the table. "Tommy's too smart for that. He'll sense the trap, disappear back into whatever hole he's been hiding in for 70 years. He paused, meeting her eyes. "But that's not the point anymore." "Then what is?" "The point is that his story ends tomorrow night, whether he shows up or not." Vinny's smile was sad but peaceful. "I realized something while I was talking to those agents. Tommy was wrong about one thing. I'm not the same terrified boy who watched Capone swing that bat. But I'm also not the man who spent 30 years jumping at shadows." Sophia reached across the table, taking his hands in hers. "So who are you?" Vinny considered this, looking around the kitchen Maria had designed, filled with the memories they'd built together. "I'm Vincent Torino. I run a pizzeria on Clark Street. I raised a daughter who saves lives every day. I loved a woman who saw good in everyone, even broken dishwashers with bloody secrets." His voice grew stronger. "And tomorrow night, I'm going to tell the world what Al Capone did to 5 men who laughed at him, not because Tommy Torino orchestrated it, but because it's a story that deserves to be told." The next evening, Navy Pier buzzed with more security than it had seen since the Democratic Convention. FBI agents in tactical gear manned checkpoints, while bomb-sniffing dogs worked the perimeters. News crews, drawn by reports of credible terrorist threats, set up their equipment with nervous energy. Vincent Torino arrived at 7:30 wearing his best suit, the one Maria had bought him for Sophia's medical school graduation. Sophia walked beside him, her arm linked through his, both of them calm in the eye of the storm they'd created. The documentary crew was there, as expected, along with representatives from the Chicago Historical Society. What they didn't expect was the small army of federal agents treating the event like a potential crime scene. Tommy Torino never showed. At exactly 8 o'clock, with cameras rolling and agents watching, Vinny began to speak. He told them about the 4 Deuces, about serving bootleg whiskey to men in expensive suits who laughed too loudly and died too quickly. He described Al Capone's voice, calm and conversational, as he explained why respect mattered more than fear. He detailed the methodical way Capone had wielded that Louisville slugger and the terrible silence that followed the laughter's end. But mostly, he talked about the boy who'd witnessed it all, terrified, traumatized, but ultimately wise enough to run, who'd spent 73 years learning that survival wasn't about hiding from your past, but about choosing what to build from its ashes. The documentary aired 6 months later. The Last Witness, Al Capone's rise to power, won 3 Emmy nominations and sparked renewed interest in Chicago's criminal history. Vincent Torino became a minor celebrity, giving lectures at universities and consulting on historical documentaries. Tommy Torino was never seen again. FBI investigations found traces of his presence, financial records, property holdings, a network of contacts that spanned decades, but the man himself had vanished like smoke. Some agents theorized he'd died years ago, operating through intermediaries. Others believed he'd simply retreated, his long game finally checkmated. Vinny didn't care which theory was true. For the first time in 73 years, he slept through the night without dreams of baseball bats and dying laughter. 6 months after the documentary aired, Sophia found her father in the kitchen early one morning, reading the newspaper over coffee and Maria's famous biscotti recipe. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the laugh lines around his eyes. "Any regrets, Papa?" Vinny looked up at his daughter, brilliant, fierce, wholly herself, and smiled. "Only one." "What's that?" I wish your mother could have known the truth. All of it. He folded the newspaper carefully. She would have understood. Maria always said broken things could be beautiful if you were careful about how you mended them. Sophia kissed the top of his head, tasting salt and thyme and hard-won peace. Outside, Mrs. Chen's dog barked once, then settled into contented silence. Some stories, Vinny thought, are worth the telling, not because they end happily, but because they end honestly. That was enough.